Texas, July 1945. The war in Europe had ended 2 months earlier, but the women's detention facility at Fort Sam Houston still housed German civilians awaiting repatriation decisions. On a Saturday morning, when heat already shimmered across the parade ground, 12 women were loaded into an army truck and driven into San Antonio without explanation. They expected interrogation, perhaps deportation processing. Instead, the truck stopped outside Rosenberg's beauty salon on Houston Street. What happened in the next 4 hours would shatter every assumption these women held about their captors, about their worth, about whether dignity could survive defeat. The women's detention facility occupied converted cavalry barracks on Fort Sam Houston's northeast corner. The buildings had housed soldiers during the previous war, then stood empty through the Depression, then been hastily repurposed in 1944 to hold German civilian women and children captured during the final collapse of the Reich. By summer 1945, roughly 200 women remained wives of military officers, nurses who'd served with German forces, administrative workers from occupied territories, mothers whose children had been placed in separate facilities pending family reunification decisions. Lieutenant Sarah Morrison managed the women's facility, 32 years old. From Philadelphia, Army Nurse Corps officer who'd volunteered for administrative duty after serving in field hospitals across North Africa and Italy. She'd seen enough war's brutality that managing detained civilians seemed preferable to witnessing more soldiers die. But the work challenged her in different ways, balancing security requirements with basic humanity, following regulations that sometimes contradicted common sense, processing women whose futures remained uncertain while their pasts marked them as enemies. Morrison had noticed something troubling during her 6 months commanding the facility. The women were declining. Not physically medical care was adequate, food sufficient, shelter acceptable. But psychologically, they were disappearing into themselves, becoming ghosts who moved through daily routines without engagement or hope. Their hair had grown long and unkempt. Their clothes, while clean, hung on frames that had thinned during years of wartime rationing and months of detention. Their eyes carried the blank expression Morrison associated with people who'd stopped believing their lives had any purpose. The worst cases were the younger women. Greta Hoffman, 23, whose husband had died in the Battle of the Bulge. Anna Weber, 26, a nurse captured in Belgium who tried to save American soldiers and been arrested anyway. Lisa Krause, 28, whose administrative work for a transport company had been deemed collaboration, even though she had no military role. These women had expected to build lives, raise families, contribute to society. Instead, they waited in barracks, their futures as uncertain as their pasts were condemned. Morrison had discussed the problem with her superior officer, Major Helen Walsh, who commanded all female detention facilities in the Southwest region. Walsh had visited Fort Sam Houston in early July, toured the facility, interviewed several women, and come to the same conclusion Morrison had reached, that these women needed something regulations didn't account for. Not just food and shelter, but restoration of dignity the tension systematically eroded. They need to feel human again, Walsh had said during their final meeting. Need to be treated as women rather than just as detainees. Need something that reminds them they matter as people, not just as administrative problems awaiting resolution. Morrison had agreed, but struggled to identify solutions within regulatory constraints. The Army didn't allocate funds for prisoner morale beyond basic recreation. The women received adequate necessities, but nothing beyond necessities. And necessities, Morrison had learned, weren't sufficient to maintain human dignity during indefinite detention. Then Walsh had returned to Fort Sam Houston on July 14th with an unusual proposal. She'd contacted several businesses in San Antonio, explaining the situation, asking if any would donate services to help detained German women restore some measure of dignity. Most had refused. These were enemy aliens. Why should American businesses help them? But one business owner had responded differently. Miriam Rosenberg owned Rosenberg's Beauty Salon on Houston Street, 58 years old. Her family had emigrated from Germany in 1923, fleeing economic collapse and early signs of the political instability that would later consume the country. Miriam had built her salon over 2 decades, serving San Antonio's wealthier women, employing skilled cosmetologists, maintaining a reputation for quality work and fair prices. When Walsh approached her about providing services to German women detained at Fort Sam Houston, Miriam had one question. Are they being treated according to law? Yes, Geneva Convention requirements met fully. Then they deserve dignity, same as anyone. Bring them to my salon. No charge. Walsh had been stunned by the immediate generosity, had tried to explain that these were German women, former enemies, people whose country had caused the war. Miriam had interrupted. My family left Germany because we saw what was coming. We've been Americans for 22 years. But we remember being refugees, being people other countries didn't want, being treated as problems rather than people. If these women are being held legally and treated fairly, then they deserve the small mercy of feeling human again. Bring them to my salon. And so, on Saturday morning, July 21st, Morrison assembled 12 women in the facility's common area. She'd selected carefully younger women who seemed most affected by the psychological erosion of detention, women whose futures seemed most salvageable if repatriation ever came, women who might benefit most from unexpected kindness. You're being taken into San Antonio, Morrison announced in German, which she'd learned adequately during her time managing the facility. You'll be escorted by guards. You'll follow all instructions. And you'll be returned to the facility by evening. The women exchanged glances. Greta raised her hand tentatively. Why? What is in San Antonio? Morrison had debated how to explain this. Decided on directness. A beauty salon. An American woman has volunteered to provide services. Hair, makeup, whatever you need. No cost to you. She's doing this as an act of kindness. Silence. The women stared at Morrison as if she'd spoken a language they didn't understand. Anna finally found words. Why would American woman do this? We are prisoners, because she believes everyone deserves dignity. Even prisoners. Especially women who've lost everything else. They rode to San Antonio in the back of an army truck, 2 guards accompanying them, the Saturday morning heat already building toward the oppressive afternoon that would follow. The women sat quietly, trying to process this development, trying to understand why an American business owner would offer services to enemy women, why the army would permit this, why anyone would care about their hair or their appearance when their futures remained uncertain and their pasts marked them as defeated. Greta touched her hair long, tangled, unwashed for days because the facility's shower schedule didn't allow daily washing. She tried to remember the last time she'd cared about her appearance. Before the war? Before her husband's deployment? Before news of his death had arrived and hollowed out everything inside her? She couldn't remember. Couldn't remember caring about anything beyond surviving each day, avoiding thought about tomorrow, moving through the present without hope or purpose. The truck stopped on Houston Street. The guards opened the rear gate. The women climbed down onto a sidewalk in downtown San Antonio, where Saturday morning shoppers moved past with barely a glance at the German women in drab detention clothing. Morrison led them through the salon's front door, where Miriam Rosenberg waited with 4 cosmetologists she'd called in specifically for this appointment. Welcome, Miriam said in English, then repeated in German. Welcome to my salon. Today you are not prisoners. Today you are women who deserve to feel beautiful. Rosenberg's beauty salon occupied a storefront that had been designed in the 1920s. All Art Deco lines and chrome fixtures. Mirrors lined one wall, reflecting the room back on itself in infinite regression. Styling chairs stood in a neat row, each positioned beneath overhead lights that could be angled to illuminate specific areas. The smell was distinctive chemicals from permanent wave solutions, mixed with floral scents from shampoos and the sharp tong of hairspray. Music played from a radio in the corner, big band standards that felt surreal to women who'd spent months hearing only institutional sounds. The German women stood frozen just inside the door, overwhelmed by sensory overload. Anna touched a chrome chair arm, feeling the cool metal under fingers that had grown used to rough military-issue furniture. Lisa stared at the mirrors, seeing her own reflection-gaunt face, lank hair, eyes that looked older than her 28 years. Greta simply stood still, unable to process that she was standing in an American beauty salon, that someone had decided she deserved this, that for a few hours she might be treated as a woman rather than as a problem. Miriam moved through the group, assigning each woman to a cosmetologist. Her staff had been briefed. These were German detainees, former enemies, women whose country had caused immeasurable suffering. But in this salon, for these few hours, they would be treated exactly as Miriam treated every client, with professionalism, with care, with the assumption that every woman deserved to feel beautiful regardless of her circumstances. Greta was assigned to Ruth, a cosmetologist in her 40s who'd worked at the salon for 15 years. Ruth gestured to her chair, speaking slowly in English that Greta mostly understood. "Sit, honey. Let's see what we're working with." Greta sat tentatively, as if the chair might collapse under her. Ruth draped a cape around her shoulders, began examining her hair with professional assessment that felt clinical and compassionate simultaneously. "When's the last time you had a proper cut?" 2 years, Greta answered in careful English. "Maybe more." "I don't remember." Ruth's hands moved through Greta's hair, assessing damage, considering options. "We're going to wash this first. Get you cleaned up proper. Then we'll talk about cutting and styling." "You trust me?" The question hung between them. Trust. Did Greta trust an American cosmetologist she'd just met? Did trust even matter when everything she'd trusted before had proven false? Her husband's promise to return, her country's promise of victory, her own assumption that life had purpose? But something about Ruth's hands moving through her hair with professional competence made trust seem possible. "Yes," Greta whispered. "I trust." Ruth led her to the washing station, a specialized sink with a curved porcelain basin designed to support the head while water ran through hair. Greta leaned back, feeling the cool porcelain against her neck, feeling Ruth's hands begin to work shampoo through her scalp. The sensation was overwhelming. No one had touched her hair with care since her mother had brushed it years ago, before the war, before everything. Ruth's fingers massaged her scalp, working loose months of accumulated dirt and oil and the residue of institutional soap that cleaned but didn't nourish. Warm water ran through her hair. Ruth applied conditioner, something Greta hadn't experienced in years. The smell was floral, almost overwhelming after months of institutional odorlessness. Ruth's hands continued their work, patient and thorough, treating Greta's hair as if it mattered, as if making this one woman's hair clean and healthy was worth the time and care. "You're doing fine, honey," Ruth said quietly. "Just relax. Let me take care of this." Greta's eyes filled with tears. She tried to stop them, embarrassed to cry in front of this stranger, this American woman who was being kind for reasons Greta couldn't understand. But the tears came anyway, not from sadness exactly, but from the unexpected recognition that someone cared enough to touch her hair gently, to speak to her with warmth, to treat her as a person deserving care. Ruth didn't comment on the tears, just continued washing, rinsing, conditioning, treating Greta's grief as acceptable rather than as something requiring fixing or explanation. Across the salon, similar scenes played out. Anna sat in a chair while a young cosmetologist named Helen examined her shoulder-length hair, considering how to restore shape to something that had grown wild during detention. Lisa received a facial treatment, feeling strange hands apply creams and lotions to skin that had grown rough from institutional soap and inadequate moisturizer. Another woman named Margarete, 48 years old, a widow, detained because her late husband had held minor administrative position, received a manicure, watching in disbelief as the cosmetologist filed and painted nails that hadn't been cared for in years. Miriam moved through the salon, checking on each station, ensuring her staff maintained the standard of care she demanded. She paused beside Greta's chair, where Ruth had finished washing and was beginning to cut, removing damaged ends with precise snips that fell to the floor like small casualties. "How are you doing?" Miriam asked in German. Greta couldn't find words, gestured vaguely at the mirror, at Ruth working behind her, at the salon that seemed to exist in a different reality from the detention facility. "Why?" Greta finally managed. "Why you do this for us?" Miriam considered her answer carefully. "My family left Germany in 1923. We were refugees. People treated us sometimes with kindness, sometimes with suspicion, sometimes with cruelty. I remember what it felt like to be on the outside, to be people others didn't want, to need mercy from strangers." She paused. "You're prisoners now. Your country lost the war. Your futures are uncertain. But you're still human beings, still women, still people who deserve dignity. That doesn't change because you're detained. But we are German. Enemies. You're women whose country started a terrible war. But you're also just women. That's what matters today. Not your nationality. Not your past. Just that you're women who deserve to feel human again." Ruth continued cutting. Greta watched in the mirror as her hair transformed, ragged ends disappearing, shape emerging, something resembling style taking form. It was just hair. Just cutting and styling. But it felt like more. Felt like restoration of something she'd lost during months of detention. Not just appearance, but self-worth. The recognition that she mattered enough for someone to spend time making her look presentable. The salon filled with small sounds. Scissors snipping, water running. Quiet conversations between cosmetologists and clients conducted in broken English and fragmentary German. The radio continued playing Glenn Miller, Benny Goodman, music from a country these women had been taught to hate, but which now offered them unexpected kindness. 2 hours passed. Then 3. The transformations progressed incrementally. Hair that had been tangled and unkempt became styled and shaped. Faces that had looked exhausted received makeup that highlighted features rather than concealing them. Nails that had been ragged and dirty became filed and painted. The women watched the reflections change, saw themselves emerge from the blur of detention into something approaching their former selves. Greta stared at her reflection when Ruth finished. The woman in the mirror looked familiar but foreign. Hair cut to shoulder length, styled in soft waves that framed her face. Subtle makeup that made her eyes look less haunted, her cheeks less hollow. She looked like someone who might have a future, someone who might matter, someone who wasn't just waiting to die or be forgotten. "What do you think?" Ruth asked. Greta touched her hair carefully, as if it might disappear if she pressed too hard. I look like person. Honey, you are a person. Always were. Just needed some help remembering." When the women emerged from their individual stations and saw each other transformed, the salon went silent. They'd spent months seeing each other as fellow prisoners defeated, exhausted, barely surviving. Now they saw women. Women who looked like they might attend church or shop in markets or live normal lives in normal circumstances. The transformation was superficial, just hair and makeup and cleaned nails. But the psychological impact was profound. Anna approached Greta tentatively. "You look beautiful." Greta met Anna's eyes. "So do you." They stood staring at each other, then at the other women, all of them processing this moment. For months, they'd been stripped of everything that marked them as individuals, their homes, their families, their possessions, their identities beyond German detainee. The salon had returned something they thought was gone forever, possibility of being seen as women rather than as problems. Miriam gathered them in the center of the salon, spoke in German so everyone understood. Ladies, I want you to know something. What happened today wasn't charity, wasn't pity, was simply recognition that you're human beings who deserve dignity. My staff and I have enjoyed serving you. You've been gracious clients. And when you return to the facility, I want you to remember that someone in San Antonio believes you matter, that someone cares whether you feel human, that even during difficult circumstances, kindness exists. One of the older women, Margaretti, who'd received the manicure, stepped forward. Her English was better than the others, learned in school before the war. Mrs. Rosenberg, we cannot repay this. We have no money. No way to thank you properly. You already thanked me by accepting the kindness. That's enough. But why? Why help enemy women? Miriam chose her words carefully. Because my family knows what it's like to be refugees, to need mercy from strangers. Because I believe that how we treat people during their worst moments reveals who we are. Because you women who deserve dignity, regardless of which country you from, or what your government did. She paused. And because the war is over, Germany lost. You're detained awaiting repatriation. But eventually, you'll go home or somewhere you can rebuild. When you do, I want you to remember that an American woman treated you with kindness when she didn't have to. Maybe that memory helps you build something better than what was destroyed. The women absorbed this. Several were crying now, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming recognition that someone cared about them, that they'd been treated with dignity, that even as prisoners they mattered enough for strangers to spend hours making them feel human. Lieutenant Morrison, who'd waited in the salon's front area during the transformations, approached Miriam. Mrs. Rosenberg, this was extraordinary. Thank you. Don't thank me, Lieutenant. Thank your Major Walsh for thinking of it. And thank your Army for permitting it. The Army didn't exactly permit it. Major Walsh made executive decision that she probably be reprimanded for. Then thank her double. Women who use authority to show mercy deserve recognition. Morrison gathered the women, explained they needed to return to the facility. The women moved reluctantly, wanting to prolong this moment, knowing that returning to detention meant returning to institutional reality, where they were problems rather than people. But they collected near the door, each one stopping to thank Miriam and her staff, the words inadequate but sincere. The truck ride back to Fort Sam Houston was different from the morning journey. The women talked quietly, touched their hair, looked at their painted nails. Greta found herself smiling, not happiness exactly, but something approaching it. The recognition that she could still feel something besides numbness, still care about something besides survival, still imagine that maybe, somehow, life might continue after detention. When they arrived at the facility, other detained women crowded around, staring at the transformations, asking questions, touching the styled hair with wonder. Word spread quickly through the barracks. American Woman had provided beauty services, had treated German prisoners as if they mattered, had spent hours making them feel human again. The impact rippled through the facility over subsequent days. The 12 women who'd visited the salon carried themselves differently, not with pride exactly, but with restored dignity. They took more care with their appearance within institutional constraints, braided their hair instead of leaving it loose, washed their faces more carefully, maintained the transformations as best they could without access to the products and tools the salon had provided. Other women noticed, asked if they could visit the salon too. Morrison explained that this had been one-time arrangement, that she couldn't authorize regular trips, that resources didn't exist for expanded programs. But the request itself revealed something important. The women wanted to feel human again, wanted to be treated as women rather than just as detainees, wanted to believe they mattered enough for someone to care about their dignity. Morrison wrote a report to Major Walsh describing the salon visit's impact, detailed the improved morale, the restored dignity, the psychological benefits that extended beyond the 12 women who'd participated, recommended that similar programs be implemented across other detention facilities, acknowledged that regulations didn't specifically authorize such activities, but argued that Geneva Convention requirements for humane treatment should include attention to prisoners' psychological well-being alongside their physical needs. Walsh forwarded the report up the chain of command with her endorsement. The response was mixed. Some officers praised the initiative, recognized its value, supported expansion to other facilities. Others criticized it as inappropriate coddling of enemy detainees, argued that resources shouldn't be spent making prisoners comfortable, insisted that detention should focus on security rather than morale. The debate continued through autumn 1945 as repatriation decisions were finalized and German women began returning to occupied Germany. But the Salon visit had accomplished something that bureaucratic debates couldn't erase, had proven that even during war, even toward enemies, individual acts of kindness could restore dignity that institutional systems eroded. In November 1945, Greta Hoffmann was among the first group repatriated to Germany. She returned to Munich, found her family's apartment building partially destroyed, moved in with her sister, who'd survived Allied bombing and Soviet advance. The city was ruins. Food was scarce. Work was hard to find. Everything she'd known before the war had been obliterated. But Greta carried something with her that other returning Germans didn't have: memory of American kindness. Memory of a salon where she'd been treated with dignity. Memory of women who cared enough to make her feel human when she'd been classified as enemy. That memory sustained her through the difficult months of post-war reconstruction. In March 1946, she wrote a letter to Miriam Rosenberg. The letter took weeks to compose, using English she'd continued practicing during detention, writing and rewriting until she felt the words captured what she meant. She sent it through Red Cross channels, hoping it would reach San Antonio, hoping Miriam would remember the German woman whose hair she'd transformed on a July morning 9 months earlier. Dear Mrs. Rosenberg, I am writing from Munich to thank you for what you did in your salon last July. I know much time has passed. I know you have served many clients since then. But I remember every moment of that day because it gave me something I had lost: the belief that I mattered as a person. I returned to Germany in November. My city is destroyed. My husband died in Belgium. My family lost everything. I work now in a factory making tools, earning barely enough to survive. Life is very hard. But when I feel most discouraged, I remember your salon. I remember Ruth washing my hair with care. I remember looking in the mirror and seeing a woman rather than a prisoner. I remember being treated with dignity when I had no right to expect it. Mrs. Rosenberg, you and your staff gave me more than styled hair. You gave me hope that human kindness exists even during war, even toward enemies, even when circumstances make kindness difficult. You proved that individuals can choose mercy when systems choose cruelty. That matters more than you know. I am trying to rebuild my life in this destroyed city. I am trying to help my sister raise her children. I am trying to believe that Germany can become something better than what it was. Your kindness helps me believe this is possible. Because if an American woman could treat a German prisoner with dignity, then perhaps humans can transcend the hatreds that governments create. Thank you. Thank you for seeing me as a woman rather than as an enemy. Thank you for spending your time and resources on someone who could not repay you. Thank you for proving that even during the darkest times, small acts of kindness can illuminate hope. I hope you are well. I hope your salon prospers. I hope you know that what you did mattered far more than a simple beauty appointment. You restored dignity to women who had lost everything else. That is a gift beyond measure. With eternal gratitude, Greta Hoffmann. Miriam received the letter in April, read it 3 times. Cried on the 3rd reading, something she rarely did. She'd wondered what happened to the German women, whether they'd made it home, whether they'd survived repatriation to a defeated country. Greta's letter answered some questions while raising others about the hundreds of women who hadn't written, whose fates remained unknown. Miriam wrote back. Her letter was shorter but equally sincere. Dear Greta, your letter reached me yesterday. I am so grateful you took the time to write, to let me know you made it home, to share your experience. I remember you clearly, the young woman whose husband had died, who looked so lost when you entered my salon, who cried when Ruth washed her hair. I remember thinking that you needed kindness more than styling. I'm glad we could provide both. You thanked me for what we did, but I want to thank you for teaching me something important. I opened my salon to you and the other women because I believed it was right, but I wondered if it would matter. If a few hours of beauty treatments could actually help women who'd lost everything. Your letter proves it mattered. Proves that small acts of kindness can carry weight beyond what we imagine. Greta, you're rebuilding your life in difficult circumstances. You're helping family, working hard, trying to believe in better futures. That takes courage I can only admire. Remember that you have worth regardless of your circumstances. You mattered when you were a prisoner in my salon. You matter now as you rebuild in Munich. You matter because you're a human being, and human beings matter inherently. I hope Germany finds its way to something better. I hope you find happiness and peace. I hope the small kindness we showed you ripples outward into your life and the lives you touch. And I hope you know that we always welcome in my salon if you ever find yourself in San Antonio again. With warmth and respect, Miriam Rosenberg. The correspondence continued sporadically over subsequent years. Greta wrote about rebuilding Munich, about her work translating documents for American occupation authorities, about her eventual remarriage to a teacher who'd returned from Soviet prisoner camps. Miriam wrote about her salon, about San Antonio's growth, about her belief that the post-war world required people who remembered that enemies could become friends if given the chance. Other women from that July salon visit wrote similar letters. Anna Weber, the nurse, wrote thanking Miriam for treating her with dignity when she'd been classified as collaborator despite having saved American soldiers. Margarete wrote about returning to her village and finding it destroyed but carrying memory of American kindness that helped her believe in Reconstruction. Lisa wrote about emigrating to Argentina, starting new life, never forgetting the salon where she'd been reminded she was human. Each letter confirmed what Miriam had believed, that treating people with dignity mattered regardless of circumstances, that small acts of kindness could restore hope in desperate situations, that individual choices could transcend the hatreds that governments created during wartime. Major Helen Walsh faced reprimand for authorizing the salon visit. Her superior officer issued a formal warning that using military resources to transport prisoners for beauty treatments exceeded her authority, violated the principle that detention should focus on security rather than morale, and set precedent that other facilities might expect to follow. Walsh accepted the reprimand without protest, wrote in her response that she believed Geneva Convention requirements for humane treatment should include attention to psychological well-being alongside physical needs, that the salon visit had cost almost nothing while producing measurable improvements in prisoner morale, that treating detained women with dignity served American strategic interests by demonstrating civilized values. The reprimand remained in her file, but didn't affect her career progression. By 1947, Walsh was promoted to colonel, assigned to oversee displaced persons programs across Europe. She implemented similar dignity restoration initiatives whenever possible, arranging for refugees to receive proper clothing instead of institutional cast-offs, organizing cultural activities that acknowledge their humanity, treating displaced persons as people requiring help rather than as problems requiring management. Lieutenant Morrison continued managing the women's facility through early 1946, until most detainees had been repatriated. She wrote extensively about the salon visit in her personal journals, analyzing what made it effective, considering how similar approaches might be implemented in other contexts. After leaving military service, Morrison became a social worker, specializing in refugee assistance, carrying forward the lesson that treating people with dignity restored hope more effectively than any material assistance. The cosmetologists who'd volunteered their time talked about the experience for years. Ruth, who'd washed Greta's hair and witnessed her tears, told the story at family gatherings, explaining how a few hours of beauty work had mattered more than anything else she'd done professionally. Helen, the younger cosmetologist who'd styled Anna's hair, went on to open her own salon, making pro bono services to struggling women a regular part of her business model. Miriam Rosenberg never publicized what she'd done, didn't seek recognition or praise, simply continued running her salon, serving clients, believing that treating people with dignity was its own reward. But word spread through San Antonio. Other business owners heard about the German women who'd been transformed at Rosenberg's salon. Some criticized Miriam for helping enemies. Others were inspired to consider how their businesses might serve community needs beyond simple profit-seeking. In 1952, a feature article in a San Antonio newspaper profiled Miriam's salon, mentioning the 1945 visit by German detainees as an example of her commitment to serving all clients with equal dignity. The article quoted Miriam, "Beauty work is about more than appearance. It's about making people feel valued, helping them see themselves as worthy of care and attention. That's true whether you're a wealthy socialite or a German prisoner. Everyone deserves dignity." The article generated some controversy letters to the editor, arguing that German prisoners hadn't deserved special treatment, that American resources should have focused on American needs. But more letters praised Miriam for exemplifying American values, for demonstrating that even toward enemies, individual kindness remained possible. Greta read about the article through contacts she'd maintained in San Antonio, wrote to Miriam expressing pride that the salon visit had been recognized, noting that the transformation had mattered, not just to the 12 women who participated, but to hundreds of others who heard about it in detention, facilities, and camps across America. Small acts of kindness multiplied when people talked about them, when they became stories that spread beyond their immediate context. In 1965, 20 years after the salon visit, several of the German women who'd participated traveled to San Antonio for a reunion. Greta came from Munich, Anna from Berlin, Margarete from her village. They'd maintained sporadic correspondence over the decades, checking in on each other's lives, sharing updates about children and careers, and the slow reconstruction of Germany into something unrecognizable from the wartime regime. They visited Rosenberg's salon. Miriam was 78 now, still working, though her daughter had taken over most management responsibilities. The salon had been updated: new chairs, modern lighting, contemporary styling techniques. But the essential character remained the commitment to treating every client with dignity, to making women feel valued, to understanding that beauty work served psychological needs beyond mere appearance. Miriam welcomed them warmly, arranged for her staff to provide services, updated hairstyles reflecting 1960s fashion, makeup application, manicures. The transformations weren't as dramatic as they'd been 20 years earlier. These women had rebuilt lives, weren't arriving from detention, desperate and hollow-eyed. But the act mattered symbolically, proved that the relationship established in 1945 could endure across decades, could transcend the circumstances that had created it. They talked for hours after the styling finished, about the war, about Reconstruction, about the Germany that had emerged from defeat, divided between East and West, democratic in one half and authoritarian in the other, trying to reckon with its past while building its future. About how individual kindness during wartime had sustained them through difficult years, had reminded them that humanity could survive even total warfare. Greta, now 43, a successful translator with 3 children, thanked Miriam again for what she'd done in 1945. "Mrs. Rosenberg, that day in your salon gave me something I'd lost the belief that I mattered. That even as a prisoner, even as an enemy, I was still a person deserving dignity." That belief sustained me through repatriation, through rebuilding my life, through all the difficult years that followed. You gave me more than styled hair. You gave me hope. Miriam, emotional despite her decades of professional composure, responded simply. You always mattered, Greta. You always deserved dignity. I just helped you remember it. Miriam Rosenberg died in 1978, age 91. Her obituary in the San Antonio newspaper mentioned the salon she'd built, the clients she'd served, and the day in 1945 when she offered free services to German detainees because she believed everyone deserved dignity, regardless of circumstances. Several of the German women who'd been transformed that day sent condolences to Miriam's family, explaining what her kindness had meant, how it had shaped their post-war lives, how they'd carried the memory of being treated with dignity when they'd been classified as enemies. The salon continued under Miriam's daughter's management, maintaining the commitment to treating every client regardless of background or circumstances with equal care and respect. The story of the German women became part of salon lore, told to new employees as an example of the business's values, shared with clients as an illustration of how beauty work could serve purposes beyond mere appearance. Greta Hoffmann lived until 1995. Her children and grandchildren knew the story about the American salon where she'd been transformed. She told it often, using it to teach them that individual kindness could transcend national conflicts, that enemies could become friends, that small acts of mercy mattered more than grand gestures. She kept a photograph taken during the 1965 reunion visit, showed her with styled hair, sitting in the same salon chair she'd occupied 20 years earlier, Miriam standing beside her smiling. The photograph represented more than a salon visit, represented the possibility that humanity could survive warfare, that dignity could be restored after being systematically eroded, that kindness remained possible even during the darkest times. The other women who participated in that July 1945 salon visit carried similar memories, told similar stories to their families, used the experience as proof that even during total war, individual humans could choose mercy over cruelty, could see beyond national categories to the person underneath, could offer dignity when systems demanded only detention and management. The transformation had lasted 4 hours. Hairstyled, makeup applied, nails painted, superficial changes that would have faded within days if they'd been only about appearance. But they weren't only about appearance. They were about recognition, the acknowledgement that these women mattered, that they deserved care, that their dignity as human beings transcended their classification as prisoners. That recognition sustained them through repatriation, through rebuilding destroyed lives, through decades of processing what the war had cost them and their country. Sustained them because it proved that even when governments created enemies, individual humans could choose to see each other as people first, as members of opposing nations second. It had started with a simple question: what do detained women need to feel human again? The answer had been surprisingly straightforward: someone to treat them with dignity, to care about their appearance, not because appearance mattered strategically, but because it mattered to them personally, to spend time making them feel valued when systems treated them as problems. Miriam Rosenberg had provided that. For 4 hours on a July morning in 1945, 12 German women had been treated not as prisoners, but as women deserving beauty services, professional care, human dignity. The transformation had been physical styled hair, applied makeup, painted nails. But the real transformation had been psychological, the restoration of hope, the recognition that they mattered, the proof that kindness survived even total warfare. Small acts, enormous impacts. Proof that individual choices could transcend the hatreds that nations created during wartime.